You're listening to a Thames Estuary Partnership podcast, celebrating London's famous tidal river. We hope you enjoy it.
Hello, I'm Eve Sanders and I'm the Estuary Edges Officer at the Thames Estuary Partnership. Hello and welcome back to this very special episode of Talk of the Thames. Today's episode is particularly special because it's officially London Rivers Week, a time to celebrate and appreciate London's rivers. And we're going to be talking a lot more about this because today I'm joined by a very special panel of experts from across the Thames, including Debbie Leach, who is the Chief Executive at Thames 21, David Webb, who is the Biodiversity Technical Specialist from the Environment Agency, and Polly Penn, who is South East Rivers Trust Programmes Manager. We're also joined by Amy Pryor, who is the Technical Director at the Thames Estuary Partnership. Now, just before we get started, I'm sure you are all aware that we are living through some very difficult times at the moment, and we have created this episode through the comfort and safety of our own homes. So please forgive the homemade audio quality. Polly, Dave, Amy and Debbie, thank you so much for joining me today.
Oh, thank you, Eve. Yeah, looking forward to it.
We're going to be covering the key messages of what London Rivers Week is all about, and then we're going to go into a few more details. Debbie, tell me, what is London Rivers Week and why is it important? Why is it happening?
London Rivers Week, we started this about 5 years ago now, and it's just been fantastic. It's celebrating London's 600-kilometre network of amazing rivers that are running across the capital, behind houses, under flyovers. We have this fantastic network of rivers all flowing into the River Thames, and these are oases for nature right in the heart of the capital. And they're often, as I say, they're often hidden away and people don't know where they are. And quite a lot of them are still in these concrete straitjackets. In fact, the bulk of them are still in these concrete channels, which look like they're draining ditches. But we're starting to rescue these rivers and turn them into looking like proper rivers again, bringing wildlife to them so that people can enjoy them again. But at the moment, so many of our rivers are London's best kept secret. And that's why we thought London Rivers Week would be a great idea, just to celebrate London's rivers, getting people to find out where their local river is and start enjoying it and looking after it. And also to celebrate the river restoration programme that's been going on, which has been fantastic. We've actually restored 33 kilometres of London's rivers, and they are now rewilded. The lengths have been, the banks have been restored so that the wildlife can enjoy and live in the banks and in the river, and people can enjoy them all. You can picnic on the banks. Even children can paddle in some of these rivers now. It's fantastic. It's connecting the community with these rivers and making them wildlife friendly again. The river restoration story is a huge success, and it is brilliant to see it happening. But we've still got an awful long way to go. We've still got over 70% of London's rivers encased in these concrete straitjackets. And so we need to increase the rate at which they're being restored. It's kind of dropped off a bit because there's been less development going on in London, and perhaps it's dropped off the priority. But there's such potential in London's rivers to make a difference to the environment, to make a difference to how people live in London and enjoy London. To have a river on your doorstep is an amazing thing. And we need more people to enjoy this and to get behind this initiative to restore more of London's rivers. We want the public sector to get more involved in restoring London's rivers. We want developers to get behind this. Restored rivers have such a huge role to play in improving the quality of new developments, to making them fantastic places to live, to getting people to connect with wildlife on their doorstep. You can do that if you restore a local river. So there's huge benefits, and we've made a great start, but there's such a long way to go. So I guess the overall point of London's Rivers Week is to get people behind us, get people knowing that there is this opportunity. We can make London an even better place to live for our wildlife and for Londoners. And that's about getting behind river restoration. So that's what London Rivers Week is all about, introducing everyone to their local river.
Fantastic. But there's so many tributaries that connect to the Thames. You often think of just the Thames estuary, but what is there, 38 tributaries, something like that?
It's something like that. It depends what you call a tributary, really. It's this amazing network of streams, brooks, rivulets to some of the larger rivers you've got in London, like the Brent and the Lee, and Ravensbourne, looking south of London, the Quaggy. There is a great network of rivers, and there's a lot of loyalty locally to people's rivers. When you think about sort of the Quaggy Action Group and some of these other community groups that have been campaigning to have their local rivers restored, and been working with the Environment Agency and others to increase the rate of to improve their local area. That's why people have wanted to see their local rivers restored and make it a real community asset. But yeah, when you say 38 rivers, I think that's probably about right, but it depends what you call a river, really. Dave could probably correct me on that.
Brilliant. Okay, so yes, Dave, on the subject, can you talk to us about some of the current rewilding that's happening around the Thames and its tributaries?
Okay, yeah, thanks. I mean, the great thing about it is that we're seeing river restoration work across London, both in the suburbs and outer London, but also in some of the most densely urbanised parts of London, the central boroughs. By and large, a lot of the work is still centred around existing areas of open space, and so there's quite relatively simple things that can be done in terms of naturalising banks and removing redundant structures which both change or degrade habitat and inhibit fish movement. And in a lot of these areas, there's some new initiatives going on called natural flood management. In the more kind of urban area, in the kind of more densely urban areas, for instance, more recently in Lewisham Town Centre and Wandsworth Town Centre, through regeneration, we have seen restoration of concrete channels and actually creating new areas of open space in areas which are predominantly built up. So there is a great range of activities covering really all communities and all boroughs. So it's exciting, but as Debbie said, I think one of the challenges is that actually the needs for restoration have actually started to increase, and we really need to look at accelerating and increasing that programme to spread the benefits of those projects across London.
So when you say that the need for them is increasing, is that because of climate change, biodiversity loss, or is there another reason why it's becoming so increasingly important?
Certainly climate change has a massive impact, and really needs to be a much bigger driver in terms of river restoration. I've already mentioned a little bit about natural flood management, and obviously with climate change there is increased likelihood of heavier storms, so both the frequency and the severity of storms are predicted to be greater, and so we really need to look at how we manage water, and actually how we manage water to put it in areas where it's beneficial rather than areas where it's going to cause damage. The other aspect though with climate change as well is actually the impact on the wildlife, because the majority of the times when people are interacting with rivers and the benefit of rivers is actually when they're in their normal flow condition, and that's where people get the benefit of seeing kingfishers, for instance, which has expanded across London over the last 20 years. And of course these species and the ecology can be damaged by increased flood flows. You get this phenomena of biological washout if you can't slow the water down and create refuge areas for species. But of course also drought and high temperatures have a similar impact. So in terms of river restoration, increasing that complexity and enabling these refugia and naturalising the hydrology of the system actually not only makes that habitat more survivable, species more survivable to extreme events. Also, it aids recolonisation so that a system can recover so much more quickly after a damaging impact, after a river has been restored.
That's really interesting. Thanks, Dave. So if we can hone in on some projects now, I mean, Polly, what's happening around your area?
Yeah, we've had some great rewilding success stories in South London, and I'm sure Debbie and others can give you some examples from the north of the river. So one of our biggest ones was on the River Wandle, which is a tributary in South London. It's a chalk stream, so there's only around 200 of those in the world. And what we did there was we managed to bring back the brown trout population. And if you don't know what a brown trout is, it's a sort of golden coloured fish with like red and black spots, and it's quite distinctive, but it's also a protected species. And we, over several years with many different partners and lots of different funding, removed the weirs to make sure the habitat was reconnected. We put back natural habitats for spawning, refuges like Dave said, and we addressed water quality with citizen scientists. And then a lot of community work later, the data was showing that the population was recovering. So that was a real success story for us. But as Dave rightly points out, there's more we need to do, because sadly with that one, recent droughts and a lot of abstraction have meant that the water wasn't really low, and we lost a spawning season essentially. So it just shows that once you've restored something, that there's still a fair bit of work we need to do to make the community understand how they're impacting those river habitats and sort of make sure there's a positive change for a much longer time. So yeah, I think that's probably our best success story if I had to pick one.
No, that's amazing. I didn't know that was happening, so that's really brilliant to know. Amy, what's going on with TAP? Be interesting to touch on estuary edges at this point, I think, although obviously I'm biased.
Yeah, so river restoration in the estuary part, and by estuary we mean the Tidal Thames running through central London out to the southern North Sea, where the tributaries all meet the Thames. Each tributary, major tributary, will have a tidal reach up to a weir that basically stops that tidal extent going any further up the river. So it's really important from a river restoration point of view to understand what's happening in the freshwater reaches, because any pollution, anything that's in the water, like litter, for example, is going to impact the tidal areas of the entire river system. So the Estuary Edges project is a very long-term look at how you can build habitat into the tidal flood defences in London. And there's some really great examples of sites that are easily accessible. The most famous one being the big reed bed system that was built around the North Greenwich Peninsula. So we call them the O2 reed beds. But you can see them if you go to the ferry on North Greenwich, if you go to the O2 sometime. If you look upstream and downstream of the passenger terminal there, you can see these big long reed beds and that was actually purpose built as part of the development of the North Greenwich Peninsula. And the Estuary Edges project is essentially design guidance for riverside developers to understand how they can build these semi-natural spaces into the flood defences as part of their riverside development. And those act as essentially a replacement for what would naturally be there if we hadn't built into the river over hundreds and hundreds of years to build the City of London. Those areas would have developed naturally into salt marshes, for example. And salt marshes have a huge role to play in the overall biodiversity of the river. So the Tidal Thames is a wildlife superhighway, and it's absolutely fundamental to commercial fish species and non-commercial fish species, also endangered species like the mighty European eel, for example. They need to migrate from the ocean up into freshwater reaches and back again as part of their life cycle. And they need these areas of what we call intertidal habitat to take refuge in, as Dave was saying. They need places to forage, places to hide from larger predators. And without that, as we've built into the river over time, we've lost those natural areas. So Estuary Edges is a way to build that back in a semi-natural way, in an engineered way. But more needs to happen. So we have 17 sites in the system of the Thames at the moment, and some of those are in the tidal bits of the tributaries draining into London. One of the best examples of that is in Barking Creek, where there's been some really lovely naturalized over time the habitat has naturalized, and you've got some actually what you would class as basically natural salt marsh habitat. You've got deep creeks running through reed bed systems, and those areas are absolutely fundamental for nursery areas for these fish. So in Barking Creek, we've actually got the largest nursery of sea bass in the whole of the UK. And the Thames Estuary itself is the biggest nursery area for sea bass and for Dover sole, which feeds the whole of the North Sea system. So you're talking about hundreds of commercial fishermen and industry that's associated with commercial fisheries rely on that nursery function of the Thames Estuary. So without that habitat, we lose all of that function. And when you go beyond biodiversity, those areas are phenomenal for carbon sequestration, for stripping pollution out of the water. So it's really, really key to our survivability, to our resilience in the face of the climate crisis, that we build as much of this semi-natural habitat back into the system. So Estuary Edges is very much focused on how do we do that, and how do we accelerate that action?
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. Thank you. I mean, it's interesting because it has only got benefits really implementing these schemes and setups to rewild our rivers. But there's a lot of stories saying that biodiversity is coming back and key species are coming back. So I don't know, Debbie, Polly, you're probably the best people to talk about this a bit more. What are some of the key species that we're starting to see return?
Yeah. Well, I'm always being asked whether or not salmon have come back to the Thames. And I always say, well, we're not quite there yet. It's a real shame, but one day, maybe, once we improve the pollution levels in the river, maybe, who knows. But we do have, I understand, in the region of 125 different species of fish in the Thames at the moment, and they are fantastic. We've got things from seahorses to we've got seals. Fantastic to see the seals basking in the sun on some of the islands in West London. They're back proper, you know, and they're in the river because that's where they belong, and they're feeding on the fish in the river, and that's why they're there, because we've got a fish that's teeming with wildlife. It's fantastic. As Amy was saying, the River Thames is such an important nursery for juvenile fish that then spend their lives in the North Sea. They are growing in East London, in West London, and finding the Thames the right place for them to live. I mean, they face huge issues, of course they do, and that's one of the things that we're all working together to address, is some of the pollution problems and other issues that wildlife in the river faces. But it's well worth doing, because we have so many different species of fish in the river, from all the different fish species to the mammals and the seals, through to bird life. So it's a real biodiverse community there. It struggles against some of the challenges it has, but it's there, and it's fighting back, and we need to do all we can to help it.
Absolutely. Polly?
Yeah, I think that's the thing. There's definitely success stories which may be quite locally based. So on the Wandle, obviously, like I said, we've managed to recover brown trout, but and we've also done a lot for European eels across all our rivers. But I think it's about doing enough and keep doing enough that those changes stay. I think that's the thing. It's making sure these habitats stay resilient, so those populations stay resilient. So yes, biodiversity is increasing in places, but there's still more to do to make sure that trend sticks, I think.
Yeah, so in terms of the impact on species, it is quite a complex picture, because there are so many factors, including water quality and water quantity, which will affect community composition, and that is often driven at a very catchment level. So kind of a London-wide view, it's quite difficult to get. But what we have looked is actually looked at some of the species which actually represent a much more general change across London. And so this we're looking at species such as kingfisher, so very much iconic species, and something which is very exciting if you actually happen to see a kingfisher, and which you can do, for instance, in the centre of Lewisham. And what we have found is that we have seen increase in the distribution across London, so that they now do occur in every borough, and including in some very densely urbanised areas. So, you know, the critical thing is with a lot of the work and species is around making that habitat availability, so it does make those communities resilient to change, and restoring rivers to what we would expect them to be. If you don't get the habitat, then all those other improvements that you also need to make won't then be reflected in the changes in species composition. So the good news around species, I think, is that unlike a lot of kind of conservation areas, the species like the kingfisher, there's also grey wagtail, Dorbenton's bat, these are species, they're there on your local river, they're there right on your doorstep, and that's the great benefit of doing conservation work on rivers, that it is there for people to see. Though, of course, there is also challenges that are associated with that, which is why a lot of our work is as much around restoring people's relationships and understanding with rivers as much as purely restoring the physical characteristics.
That's a major part. So we sort of covered the wildlife side and the positive impacts it has on wildlife, but also the people, not just aesthetically, you know, seeing a healthy river that's been, you know, had all these positive changes is so good for us. But, you know, also it makes, as Debbie was saying earlier, people can enjoy it. To talk about social inclusion and the sort of benefits to health and well-being, Amy, let's start with you, and Debbie, if you'd be happy to chip in there as well.
Well, health and well-being has become more and more important, or certainly has been a lot more present in people's awareness. So certainly over the last few years, and there's a growing body of research that shows that obviously access to nature is really good for your health and well-being as a human being. We didn't always live in cities disconnected from our green and blue spaces. We were very much part of the landscape and part of the biodiversity, if you like, of an area. But as we've become more civilized, if you like, we've become more and more disconnected from that. So there's a direct relationship between your level of access to nature and your level of health and well-being. And a lot of research in recent years, really recent years, is around how blue spaces in particular are like the best. Blue is best, basically, for your health and well-being, and certainly for your mental health. So the next time you're down by the Thames or by your local river, take a moment, take a breath, and just listen to the sounds and watch the water go by, and you'll actually notice that your heart rate goes down, your breathing becomes easier, the tension that you've been feeling, any of the concerns that you've got in your mind might just dissipate. Even if it's ever so slightly, you will notice that you feel better being in that space. So one way we've been working with that within TEP is we do a lot of walks and talks for different events, and we started inserting a mindful moment on our walks to say, let's just all stop 1 minute, close your eyes, take a deep breath. What can you hear? What can you smell? What can you see? So that you start to actually understand that you do have this connection with the river. And one of the key things that we've always struggled with in terms of raising awareness about the Thames, the tidal Thames in particular, is because it's brown. People think that it's dirty, and it really isn't. It's one of the cleanest rivers in all of Europe. We still got a long way to go. I mean, it still has its challenges, but it's an example. It's actually a global example of a river that has recovered from being ecologically dead in the 50s to being thriving, just as we've just been talking about in terms of wildlife. And it's brown because it's tidal. The tide picks the sediment, the soil, if you like, up off the riverbed, and it mixes with the water. That's the only reason that it's brown. It will always be brown, no matter how much we clean it up, how much we can restore it. But what you have to remember with estuaries, in particular tidal areas, is that brown equals good, because all of that sediment releases little critters from in amongst the sediment that the fish feed off, that the birds feed off, and it releases nutrients into the water that helps the habitat establish and grow. The seeds floating in the water that need to land somewhere to plant to propagate, to make more habitat naturally. When you're looking at the river, thinking about why it's brown, think actually brown equals really good. Our estuaries are our most productive in terms of biological productivity. They are the most productive ecosystems that we have in the UK. And that's why they're so diverse and why they have such a crucial role to play, certainly within nursery areas and within fish and bird species. There's just nothing like an estuary, basically, for biodiversity.
What Amy was talking about is absolutely true. So to see the impact on people of just being next to the river, I guess a lot of the benefit of the activities that people undertake with Thames 21 is that actual just bringing people to the river and experiencing the river and saying, hey, these are amazing places. We need to protect and look after them. And just seeing people's faces, how they feel about themselves, how they feel about each other. In London, it's quite difficult to get to know the people where you live. There's nothing like having an event around a river to bring people together. You're meeting like-minded souls. You're working on a shared outcomes, a shared goal, and you've got something to talk about together. And you're getting to know your neighbours, and you're feeling more rooted in your community. And that's all because of the river, and because the attraction of rivers crosses all boundaries. It crosses boundaries of age, of culture, of whoever you are. Everyone can feel, yes, it's lovely to be by the river, and people naturally gravitate to rivers. We've certainly seen that during the COVID crisis recently. They've shown us how important our blue-green spaces are. Certainly, I've seen people flocking to riverbanks and just enjoying those spaces so much. It's great to see people valuing their rivers more than they have previously. And yeah, rivers are something that everybody can access. They're free. Anybody can go there, and you can meet other members of your community there. So they have huge benefits for people.
This is probably the topic that we've all been wanting to avoid. It's been in our faces for the past few months, but I think it's really important to talk about. So how will river restoration, how could that help London achieve its plans for a green recovery post-COVID?
Clearly, one of the things with the recent lockdown has really kind of amplified the importance of quality open space and that accessibility. And this is where river restoration really has a great potential as a program for improving that quality of open space. And what I mean in this respect is actually around making that open space more complex in terms of habitat and visually much more exciting and able to stimulate the imagination. So in essence, river restoration is about making something which is uniform and quite dull turning it into something complex and actually stimulates that imagination. And so as a program, it has that potential to actually improve that quality of green space across the whole of London. I think the other aspect as well actually is around people and skills. Really, over the last 20 years, we've seen a phenomenal increase in people getting involved in a whole range of activities, from relatively simple activities to actually quite scientific activities, or monitoring pollution, for instance. And so again, we have a situation where actually it provides an opportunity for people to not only understand but also improve their skills. And I think this is going to be increasingly important. Now, as a conservationist, as a background, historically was very much around trying to conserve a steady state within a specific habitat. We're no longer in that position. We're actually about managing change and actually having citizen science projects who are able to kind of give bigger pictures in terms of monitoring and understanding our environment. It's an absolutely essential resource to help us understand what is happening to our environment and hopefully help us guide that change will be for the better and not for the worse. And as a consequence, it is a potential fantastic tool to actually help provide people with a whole range of skills going forward.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I think because of the lockdown that everybody's gone through, it's actually made a lot of, well, I found with our volunteer network or communities, it's made a lot of people look on a local, outside my front door scale. And so that's another way that river restoration, and we can use that as a mechanism to capitalise on that local feeling and get people doing more positive stuff to change their local environment, which then embeds those river-friendly behaviours for the future. So I think that's an opportunity that none of us plan on missing.
Absolutely. Debbie?
Even though everyone's going through such difficult times at the moment, there's never been such a demand for people wanting to get out and about on their rivers and volunteer to improve them. Obviously, we need to do this under really strict guidelines and procedures to make sure that everybody's safe. So it means that spaces at volunteering events are limited. But nevertheless, we're running volunteering events which are allowed. It's not a social gathering. It's different. It's volunteering is allowed in larger groups. And so we're continuing to do those because there's so much public demand for them. People want to improve their local environment. And as Polly said, people aren't traveling to work now. They're working from home and they can see what's going on locally. And they're commenting on it, they're noticing it, and they want to make improvements to where they live. And that certainly includes local rivers. So we're doing what we can at the moment. Obviously, the guidelines are changing all the time and we need to respond to that. But there's a big push from people, from the community, to want to get involved and help improve and look after their local river.
We're going to move on to perhaps an obvious one, which is we all want to see wildlife-rich, accessible and healthy rivers. So what are the aspirations for the future? I mean, it sounds like we've made a cracking start on the Thames and its tributaries, but what needs to happen and what do we want to see happen in the near future?
We have such huge potential in London, and we just need to get everyone behind this initiative to restore London's rivers, to rewild them, to green them, to return wildlife to London. But at the moment, we've still got over 70% of London's rivers encased in concrete, and that's just not good enough. And we must get this river restoration up and running again. We need to make real progress on this. And what we want to do is restore about one third of London's rivers by 2050. If we can do that, we'll be making a fantastic community and environmental wildlife benefit for London. And it's achievable. We just need to restore about 5 kilometres a year and we will get there. It is achievable. We just need everyone to gather behind us. We need the public behind us. We need the public to call for more river restoration in their neighbourhood. We need the local authorities to say, yeah, the benefits are multiple to river restoration. It improves people's health and well-being. It brings communities together. It improves the places where people live. The benefits are multiple. This is a really cheap way, a cost-effective way in which we can improve London, improve our borough. So we need local authorities to get behind it. We need developers to get behind it. River restoration could add so much to new developments that are coming through. It's a unique feature of London that we can bring this to new developments, and these are valued, and these will make people's developments so much of higher quality. It will increase their value. So yes, go for it. Everybody needs to get behind river restoration. Everyone has a role to play, and let's all get together and restore more of London's rivers.
Fantastic. Thank you. Amy, Dave, Polly, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, just couldn't agree more. From an estuary, the salty end point of view, the more you restore the upstream rivers, the greater the benefit to the estuary and ultimately the ocean. So from our work, we have an ambition to raise awareness and really help people make the connections in their minds around how all of our rivers are part of one big system. It's one big river basin. All the rivers lead to the tidal Thames, which leads to the ocean. So anything that's in any one of those rivers is going to ultimately end up in the estuary and in the ocean. Beyond the sort of practical restoration of the estuary, developing a string of pearls of connected habitats up the whole length of the tidal Thames, that's our ambition. But it'll be slow going, because it's you have to do it as part of riverside development and planning, and it's a bit more costly, but the benefits are absolutely massive, which I think we've really put across already. But to follow on from that, if we really believe that if you understand that actually the tiny little lifestyle changes that you can make can have such a huge impact. So something as simple as carry a refillable water bottle with you and don't buy water in a single-use plastic water bottle. Because ultimately our waste management system doesn't capture it all. It will end up, some of it will end up in the river, and that will stay in the river for up to, in the tidal Thames, for up to 3 months. It'll break down into tiny pieces of plastic, and fish and marine mammals and the seals and the seahorses, they eat that. And if it manages to get out of the tidal Thames, it contributes to the global plastic pollution problem of the ocean. There's no away and throw away. So it will end up somewhere else, either entangling a marine mammal or ingested by a fish. And it ultimately could end up on your plate, because we eat fish. So those tiny bits of plastic can end up in our actual bodies. So it's a very small lifestyle change that can have a massive impact if everybody did it. So, you can extend on from that. The more, I believe, the more you understand, or the more you feel connected to something, you'll make better choices, or you can make better choices. You'll be better equipped to make those choices.
There we go. There's no away and throw away. I like that.
What I would like to see for the future, well, talked very much about we're in a period of great change now, and we have mentioned about the importance in terms of resilience of the natural environment. So we can't stand still just to maintain existing condition. We have to invest. But I think also it's very important about the resilience of London as a society for people, and that how river restoration can actually help in terms of enabling inclusion of for people to get involved across all of the communities and boroughs. It is very much about having that access to wildlife and green space on your doorstep. And that isn't available to everyone still at the moment. And certainly it's an aspiration of the GLA to actually help deliver that. And again, river restoration, it has to be part of that package of work for not only the recovery, but for the future resilience of people, both for their economic opportunities, their learning opportunities, but also clearly their health and well-being.
We've spoken about the benefits of people connecting and experiencing their local river, and I'm sure we've got lots of listeners who are now itching to get involved with London Rivers Week. So how can people get involved and help with their local river?
You need to go onto the website and see what's happening in your area. There's lots going on. There are online activities. There may be activities around rivers that you can get involved in. There's lots to do, and lots of organisations involved. London's really rich in its NGO sector, in the charities that are part of the catchment partnerships in London Group, and they're all running different activities that people can get involved with. So there should be something going on near you or online. We're really lucky to have so many organisations helping people to engage with their local rivers. There will be one near you.
Happy London Rivers Week! Woo!
Hey!
And thank you everyone for your time. That was really interesting, and I think it's going to be a really great week. So yeah, enjoy.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm really looking forward to it.
That's it for this episode of Talk of the Thames. We really hope you enjoyed it and are now feeling buzzed to go out and find out more about this exciting week ahead. For more information on London Rivers Week and the events happening across the river and online, please visit the London Rivers Week webpage at www.thames21.org.uk/London Rivers Week. What a mouthful. Here you can find out more and access the shiny new interactive map, which allows you to see what's going on in your area, along with a self-guided walks directory, should you wish to go and check out your local river restoration site. I hope you have a really great week and we'll see you back here next month for a brand new episode.